Hello and welcome to the Nano Film Improv Podcast. I'm Dave Heron. This podcast is about my trials and tribulations associated with improv comedy and doing it, performing it, rehearsing it. So this is really a cathartic outpouring of the things that I've learnt, the things that I'm struggling with, and an opportunity to share with you and hear from you also some of the things that have worked for you, and equally there'll be some things on this podcast that you have tried that don't work for you. It's all very subjective. My experience level is, well, I've had a few years experience doing improv. I've taught a bit of improv. I've performed with a whole range of exciting and talented improvisers and learnt from sets that have gone well and sets that haven't gone well. And this is all part of an evolution for me as well. So you're very welcome in joining me on this podcast. So the topic of today's podcast is trusting the relationship process. I've watched TJ and Dave, who are excellent improvisers from Second City. I've watched, obviously, Schwartz and Middleditch. Both of these acts, plus many, many others, are excellent at just starting with a relationship between two characters. The real fundamentals, not overthinking it, just having a point of view and then starting the scene. Now, you'll probably think, isn't that what most improv is anyway? Yes, but I've been very much focused at the moment in terms of just holding an emotion towards the other character and trying my level best not to drop it. As I've talked about in previous podcasts before, I have had a tendency to, I guess, drop my status or change my point of view to accommodate the other character. And of course, that's good when you're starting out with doing improv. But I think I'm of the view now that that shouldn't happen so early on in a scene. You should be able to establish the characters, both of them or more of them, point of view and stance on things, and indeed each other, at the beginning of the scene, which is kind of linked to, I guess, the everyday, which I've talked about on another podcast. So indeed, why I wanted to talk about it today was because it has been a major focus for me of late. And one of the wonderful opportunities I've had to be able to do this is with a wonderful improviser, Alex Derry. And we've had a few gigs together where we have just done two-prov. And in fact, our very first gig was quite impromptu. We'd been thinking about it for quite a while, about doing a two-prov scene inspired by the likes, as I say, of the Middleditch and Schwartz or the TJ and Dave, or indeed, actually the wonderful Actor's Nightmare led by Steve Steen. And just coming on stage with a point of view about the other character and trying our level best not to change that point of view and just seeing where that relationship goes and not worrying about whether the audience laugh or cry or think whatever, but just maintaining our entire focus about the relationship between our two characters. And that's something I've wanted to do for a long time, as I say, and now I've had this wonderful opportunity to do a few gigs and hopefully more to come in the future with Alex. So how this is different to other improv, I think, for me anyway, has been not trying to create a premise or something at the beginning, an incident or event or something. What we tend to do is get a location where this relationship will be set, and then we just take it from there. But the things that have worked well for me so far, I think, are probably holding the silence between two characters. So being comfortable in silence on stage. Now that has been quite a big step for me, because I think in the past, I've been very concerned with worrying if there's a silence on stage, then the audience is clearly not having fun and something must be filled with it, either an action or somebody must be talking. And over time, I've managed to get myself more and more comfortable, so much so that I think I actually enjoy the silence on stage between two improvisers, and I'll come on to other facets of that in a second, which help build on that. I enjoy the silence more than I think I do with the laughs. And that's quite a bold thing to say, but I think I've become comfortable knowing that if an audience is silent and you as an improviser are totally engrossed in the scene itself, then I think you have to assume that the audience is also engrossed with you. So that's another thing, is obviously getting over the fact or worrying that the audience might be disinterested. Silence I have now interpreted as the audience are on the edge of their seat and they're wanting to know what you're going to say or do next, particularly if that relationship that you're bringing together on stage has some kind of tension about it. And you care about the characters as well. So silence has been an absolute biggie for me, and it continues to be. And it's, as I say, it's so rewarding when the relationship pays off and the audience are completely with you as well. Now, with that silence, I've also found that holding eye contact with the other improviser also helps massively as well. So silence and eye contact helps. Now, you don't have to always do eye contact. In fact, actually, not there are certain, I guess, mannerisms where not holding eye contact can show nervousness, for example, or anxiety or guilt. But for the main, I've tried to hold eye contact with silence so that the audience and, of course, the other character know that I am very much focused on them and the relationship that our two characters had and where that is going to go. And indeed, if I'm not going to do eye contact, I think it has to be deliberate. We've talked before about neutral distance and characters that don't appear to show emotion. I think it has to be deliberate if you're not showing eye contact so that you can then demonstrate that type of emotion, as I say, anxiety, guilt, and other emotions where a character wants to actively avoid eye contact. And the audience, of course, can see that. And another one linked to that, I think, is emotion in the face and the gestures that you make. I think sometimes improvisers, and I've been very guilty of this before, is worrying about overacting, a bit of hammy or wooden acting. But I have to keep reminding myself that on most improv stages, there are no costumes, there's no backdrop, there's no props, and therefore you need to let the audience know how you're feeling by a slight over-exaggeration of emotion. I mean, of course, it has to be believable, which is why the acting aspect of improv, I think, is very, very important indeed, and why they are so closely related and are, as I said before, bedfellows in that regard. But emotion in the face and gestures also help to intensify the relationship between the characters on stage. So I think those are the things: silence, eye contact, or deliberate not eye contact, and emotion in the face and gesticulation. Those are the things that are beginning to work well for me. But as I say, I'm still not an expert in any regard, and those are clearly things that I still need to develop on in time, particularly not dropping the emotion. And that is one particular development point that I'm having to hold on to, consciously hold on to, and not drop my status. So going on stage with a clear emotion about how I feel about the other person, and I think TJ and Dave have talked about it in terms of it being the heat between two characters, but holding on to that. Of course, naturally, through improv, you begin to find out what the scene is about. And I know a lot of people talk about the scene already being there and being created in front of you already, but I do struggle with holding that emotion and consciously sticking with it until there is at some point a middle ground between two characters. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily your point of view on life might differ, but your character might reach some sort of rational compromise because they care possibly about the other character. And again, that's something that lots of improv teachers talk about extensively. It's about having your characters getting on, certainly, or agreeable. They might have disagreements between them, but there's no sort of real animosity between them where it's a real problem, which is when, of course, where you begin to narrow your scope of optionality of the things you could explore in your scene if you end up having a problem right at the very start. So having characters who care about each other, or at least know each other and have some kind of defined relationship where that relationship isn't animosity right from the very start, or it can be animosity, but the improvisers are aware of it and are therefore able to skillfully navigate that, which is not me right now. So not dropping my emotion is one clear thing that I am consciously aware that I need to work much harder on. I also link to that, as I was saying, what we've just been talking about, have a habit of finding the problem too quickly. So not allowing the scene to bed in. It's okay to be unseen, having a very amicable relationship with your other improviser on stage. You could be in a house doing some object work, talking about whatever you wanted to, but it doesn't need to be a problem right from the start. And I've historically, back to the earlier point about me worrying about what an audience think, I've always, I think in the past, thought that it needs to have some kind of event or problem to make it interesting, and therefore I've always jumped to that relatively soon, which is fine because I think it's hopefully showed that I've been listening to what the other character has been saying and reacting to it, but it's been too soon. And so I've got to, in a way, work on that habit of not finding the problem too quickly, too early on in a scene. And then finally, the thing right now, it's finally, goodness me, as though that this is only 3 things that I need to work on. At the moment, consciously in my mind, this is the final point. I think it's been, I've jumped into scenes too early where the relationship is very intense between 2 characters. And as you could probably tell in the earlier part of the podcast, I was using that word intensity. And that's been, I think, slightly the challenge, is that it's almost been right from the off 2 very intense characters. And some feedback that I have had is that it feels a bit intense right from the very beginning. And where do those characters go? Now, yes, you can de-escalate intensity, but I think I'd like to work on amicable relationships at the start that then might build to some form of intense relationship between them. But I think I jumped to that a bit like the problem, a bit too quickly, because, again, probably driven by the worry that an audience isn't interested, of thinking, well, this can't be amicable because the audience wants to see people very passionate and irked by things or annoyed by things. Whereas actually just having 2 characters on stage who just get on, whenever I've watched that on stage, they just do it effortlessly, and it's just enjoyable, because I'm beginning to think more and more now, I think people just want to see characters on stage who get on. Yes, they want to see a little bit of adversity, but they want to see them triumph over adversity, especially with relationships that you really care about. So those are the things that I think I'm going to have to keep on working on for the foreseeable future, but with some wonderful improvisers that I'm currently working with, particularly Alex. There's so much for me to learn from, and in such a fun environment as well. So I'd be really keen to know what your trials and tribulations are with focusing on relationships, what works for you, what hasn't worked for you, and how you're trying to overcome some of those challenges as well. So thanks very much for listening to the Nanofilm Improv Podcast, and I'll catch you in the next one.